Orion, let's do this!
Welcome back. So this is Orion's rhythm bass track split into many pieces to line up with the remaster. I had this 95% done last week when I released the video for part 2 of Orion, and actually spent the better part of this week moving the pieces around to line them up and automating what I wanted to bring up and bring down. So let's start with the automation lane. Default is -2. If I liked it, it went to -1, gave it a slight increase in volume. If it was too quiet, it went to 0, and if it was too loud, I brought it down to -4. The first thing I automated was the 4th quarter of the main riff. Cliff does this little against the beat, kind of pushing back a little bit on James's riff, and it sounds really cool. The next thing I did on the automation lane was right here. When the bass solo, the first one happens, the track goes a little bit light in volume because I separated it with the track separating software. So this is what that sounds like solo. Let's move it back to here. You can hear the distortion. You kind of lose a little bit of it there. So I raised it because you also lose volume too, to reset to 0. So I was not able to use the lead bass track for the 2 bass solos, and if you've seen my episode for When the Bell Tolls, you already know why. The high-pitched stuff, when you move it around, it never lines up, and it sounds really pitchy, and it sounds like there's 2 of them happening at the same time, which this can't have. But the lead bass on the album is at lead guitar level, so there's really no need to boost it, and it's that rhythm bass underneath it all that we really wanted to get at and elevate. So what I automated down on this song was Cliff's open E. Again, I don't believe Cliff was compressed on this album, and you can hear his open E on the recordings. So to show you what I'm talking about, this is coming out of the solo, and watch how when the track separation for the bass solo ends, how the distortion comes back. And you hear how clicky that is. That ends up on the album. Now, 2 things about that. One, he's plucking so hard that it sounds like he's picking. This reminds me of Jason Newsted's sound with the constant picking. He's plucking that hard, or at least hitting it with his calloused fingers in a certain way to make it sound like that. And number 2, I had to be very careful because this gets very echoey because the bass track is faster than the remaster, and everything had to be split and expanded and pushed back to line up. So every time he hit those triplets or whatever, those single notes with the open E, I had to split it and line it up, and you can see it got pretty crazy in places, but it was all just to make it not sound echoey, and it still has a slight echo, but it's much more manageable than it was. That splitty bass track. Something I automated completely off the recording was the beginning of the middle section, and here's why. One, it was loud enough, and 2, when you don't, it sounds like this. Like there's 2 basses or it has a chorus. I can't have that. So instead, I automated it down, and I did bring it in over here at -3 when the drums kick in. So it has more volume, and then once again, as well, I brought it up to -2 as the drums and guitars get louder. So if you've heard the isolated tracks or any remixes of Orion from those tracks, there's things that just disappear on the recording, and that's because the stems that were generated for Guitar Hero were designed for you to go from playing James's rhythm guitar to Kirk's lead guitar solo and back to James's rhythm guitar, or Cliff's rhythm bass to Cliff's bass solo and back to Cliff's rhythm bass. So whenever there's a solo, because it was designed for the player to continue on through that solo, the rhythm track drops completely out. So on Orion, the 2 bass solos have no rhythm bass under them, and all the guitar solos have no rhythm guitar under them. It's quite something to behold. We got some special guests on our episode today, kids. Please welcome James and Lars from Metallica. Wait, what happened? what I was just talking about. It's like this for the whole song. Whenever Kirk's playing, James isn't. And this is why, when you hear the remixes of Orion, there's just missing tracks. And if you listen closely, there's a super quiet acoustic guitar played by James, which doubles Cliff's bass track, and I think he plays the third or the sixth instead of the octave at the end, but it is in there. If you listen to the isolated guitar track, though, it's not in there. Again, most of what I automated up was the fourth quarter of each phrase because Cliff usually threw in a pretty neat little fill. Fleming Rasmussen once said Cliff had a way about him where he could play something that did not make sense, and the way he played it made complete sense. And right there, the bass solo starts and we lose a little bit of distortion and volume, so I raised it up. And you'll hear when the solo ends, the distortion comes back. So the song originally ended with no fade out and a gong. It's often referred to as the gong ending. But if you go back and listen to it from that same position, so Fleming, or someone, obviously it was probably Fleming, looped the guitar and the drums, but didn't loop the bass. And they probably doubled back to a certain point around here and basically reattached it and let it fade out, which is why the bass fades out on the recording well before the drums and the guitar fade out. So Cliff was literally left out of the loop. If you saw my episode for Seek and Destroy in Season 1, I said where Anesthesia is clearly Cliff's bass opus for the album, what he played on Seek and Destroy was highly developed and executed with excellence. I said something similar to that effect on Creeping Death's episode in Season 2, because where the Call of Cthulhu is definitely Cliff's big bass solo on the album, mixed criminally quiet if you ask me, his performance on Creeping Death was rehearsed and down cold when they recorded it. In keeping with tradition, this is the Metallica Re-Remastered series, it is my opinion that Orion is not only Cliff Burton's opus on Master of Puppets, it's also his best performance. He has a small bass solo in the beginning of the song, he wrote the entire middle section, and he has a harmony bass solo at the end of the song that he stole from Kirk Hammett. So for many reasons, I would give the bass track of the album on Master of Puppets to Orion. And some would say bass track of a lifetime. Orion really is the last of the hard ones. I'm kinda gonna miss doing these, but not really. Damage Inc.'s bass stem, because it doesn't have an isolated bass track, comes from track separation software, and all 5 of Jason Newsted's isolated bass tracks on Injustice for All have less than 5 splits each because they were compressed when they were recorded. Take that, YouTube compression. But all told, Orion has a total of 161 splits across 8 minutes and 27 seconds, or 1 split every 3.15 seconds. And now it's time once again for the in-album Lifeline segment, brought to you as always by Fresh Produce. No, not the brand, the concept. Eat your fruits and veggies. In this segment, I always ask the question, would I trade? If the song that I'm working on has an isolated bass track, would I trade it away for one that doesn't? And if the song that I'm working on does not have an isolated bass track, would I trade it for one that does? Well, in the case of the Master of Puppets album, there are 8 songs, 6 of which have isolated bass tracks. The 2 that do not are Leper Messiah and Damage Incorporated. With regards to Orion, I would not trade in its bass track to get one for Leper Messiah, Damage Inc., or any song on this album or any other Metallica album. So the verdict is no, I would not trade. It's another beautiful day to be indoors working on Orion. Now I'm gonna get some sun. I should have the fade version of Orion out today. Look for that. I'm going to try to do a gong version. I don't know if the Guitar Hero tracks are going to line up with the remaster, or if I can even patch them or make it work, or if they'll sound different. But I'm going to do a 4th episode of Orion no matter what to wrap things up. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. This is the Metallica Re-Remastered series. Stay tuned for more. Turn on your heart lights. Let it shine wherever you go. Let it make a happy glow for all the world to see. Hurry up. You want to come downstairs, asshole.